Alright, it's my second vid for the 1560 turn. First one was really the interface between the two second and third periods in the game. Here I'm on period 3. I rolled some dice. By my understanding of the original rules, this ends up in the top box because I have to subtract all these dots, and it pretty much is guaranteed to do so from the event roll because of Spanish taxation of the Dutch. Now, this almost always happens. It's not necessarily in Spain's best interests to allow the Dutch to not get this event. But here in the Risto events, things look very, very different. I'm going to have to parse the hell out of these because it doesn't seem to match. First of all, it seems to imply a Burgundian minor, which, you know, historically was the case until Charles V's reign, and he's dead now, which was this territory in here that the Spanish held was the old, I don't know if it was the Kingdom of Burgundy or the Duchy of Burgundy. They both existed. I think the kingdom was long gone by this point. Anyway, this was one of his major inheritances, and it isn't part of Spain in reality in a lot of ways. Farnese, for example, was sent there to govern it during a significant portion of his time. Anyhow, moving away from that, this makes life very difficult because it has some immediate effects that are revolts, etc., but it doesn't seem to mesh well with the rules that I'm working with here. So, for example, now it's an activated event. The other one wasn't. It just happened. Here the Dutch get the choice to enter it, or the Spanish can go in and try to crack down on the revolts. And it's not really clear from the rules that I've got before. The Dutch get to handle their income, and I don't know what rules changes were required for these. They didn't come with the packet of information I found. Anyway, it looks significantly different from the other, and we'll see how that works out. But I'm going to have to Conquest of Holland. What the hell? Oh, that's another special case. So there's just page after page of this, which may cover some of the special rules that are in the original rule book, as well as the actual event rules, which actually basically say, hey, go look at the special rules. So yes, this is one of the big events in the game. It's going to take me some time to figure it out. The other two events, well, one of them is pretty easy. It's wars in India, which affect the northern India. They'd affect the production of money there. They'd also affect any colonies or trading posts. But it's only in the north, so it doesn't affect the one Portuguese trading post in India. It's not an issue here, and it gets rid of an event that could kind of destabilize people's concerns in India if they moved into there. The other one jumped onto the next period. Now, the next period is quite a ways away, right? It's 1560 now, the next one's 1615. This is sort of the long period in the game. Although the next one's kind of meaty, too. It's the 30 Years' War. It doesn't trigger immediately. It triggers upon the death of the emperor. But how do we track the death of the emperor? I don't know. I really don't. It's not Franz Joseph here. He doesn't have a little king symbol. If Spain or France or something like that was the emperor, the death of their king, of their monarch, would count. I don't know if there's anything in the game that's going to trigger the death of an emperor for the Habsburgs, except if we get an election to the Holy Roman Empire, somehow that will trigger the 30 Years' War, and that's something I have to keep in mind. Other than that, I don't know anything. There might be, I know we've got Frederick here. He may have made, no, he didn't make a ploy for it. Yeah, so I don't know how that's going to work out either. At worst comes to worst, the very first turn of the next period, it will be triggered. I'm not going to worry too much about that one until it comes about, though. Okay, silly me. I looked back into the Holy Roman Empire event from the first period, and if it's a minor, you got to track when they're dying. Well, this guy is dying next turn. That's when we're going to have the 30 Years' War breakout. That's very early. And it's going to have some interesting effects on the game. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, no War of the Schmalkaldic League, I guess. Anyway, we'll see how that ends up coming out. Okay, so I'm going to waste a lot of time here because, not just to waste video time, but because the revolt of the United Province under these Risto rules is significantly different. And I'm less familiar with it. The other one basically just creates the Dutch and says, oh, now you're at it. This one I don't know if it's sufficiently significantly more historical, but it does allow for some interesting options. First of all, the revolt doesn't break out right away, but the Dutch are a player because it's period 3. So, because of Spain's being counter-reform Catholic, they end up all these provinces in revolt. Now, those provinces, I think, are still owned by Spain, which is to say, if the revolt ended, it would be Spain that was able to tax them and not the Dutch. Interesting concept there. However, the Dutch are going to get their shipping, the trade center, and their manufacturers. All that stuff they're going to collect income from. But I think the territories are actually still Spanish. Actually, from the Risto event, it looks like they're still Burgundian. Whatever that is, I don't have any rules that cover Burgundy as its own country. So obviously I'm missing something that these are supposed to have with them. Now, when the Dutch revolt is activated, any provinces in revolt become Holland and not and don't become part of Spanish territory automatically. It's kind of an interesting, weird situation here, and I think that's the big distinction here. Holland can declare the revolt when they like. They can declare, hey, we're happy with this. Or they can wait for a Spanish unit to march into their territory. At that point, it automatically happens, which the Dutch are allowed to suppress the revolts. I'm not quite sure how they go about this because they have no troops that they're allowed to have at this point. But apparently they're allowed to suppress them somehow. The Spaniards can send one force in there, even against the Dutch, to suppress the revolts. Now, when the event takes place, it'll trigger the reform if it hadn't already happened for the second time. We've had that. I think we had the third time as well. I'll have to look that up. Because I remember Scotland. They're saying Scotland's become Protestant now. Holland will no longer be a vassal or enforced alliance with Spain. I have no way to handle that. But what I'm going to say there is Holland's currently owes this income, which they would have been paying while they were under Spain. And they would lose that. That status would go away. But there's revolts there, so it's not going to happen anymore. It counts as a civil war, which means other people intervening in it can cause both Spain and Holland to be at war with them instead and ignore their own war. So everybody's got to kind of leave Spain alone, and Holland for that matter, during this. When it happens, and again, this is based on Spain being counter-reform Catholic, all non-national territory belonging to Holland, except for Flanders, automatically becomes Dutch. So these territories will go over to the Dutch no matter what. They're their home base. But Flanders, which was actually the heart of the rebellion at first, will not be surrendered automatically. But, let's see. Okay, I think that actually will join the Dutch at this point. Now, if if Spain has any Dutch fortresses and provinces it owns, it'll get them. That's not really an issue here. There'll be a revolt in all provinces that surrender to Spain unless there's a Spanish military stack present. These revolts will be controlled by Holland, and they can't produce rebel military units, which is going to mean that the whole of this area becomes kind of in turmoil, as it really was. Okay. And for a Protestant Spain, that would be a revolt plus. If the Dutch will get William of Nassau, which is like the original, and he's a 999 for a randomly determined reign. Now, during the administrative phase, the Dutch are allowed to build regardless of their turn limits for the first turn of this. As long as William of Nassau is their monarch, he's got a special leader for that, which I think doesn't come in this turn. I think he won't be available till next turn. Now, he can be the monarch as of the moment the revolt actually breaks out, but he can't. The leader's not on the board. And they're kind of disassociated, so if the leader's killed, the monarch stays in the game, I believe. But if the monarch dies, the leader is removed. It's kind of a weird kind of way to handle things. He must be on the map on every turn like other named leaders. And troops that he's with are veterans. An advantage for their morale. Okay, the event can never lead to peace in the turn it's activated unless by enforced unconditional surrender. The Dutch revolt can end in two ways. One is if Spain and Holland make a peace treaty, at which point whatever's handed over, etc., is handed over. Now, I guess the historical there is that Flanders got surrendered to the Spaniards. Okay. The other side is Spain can conquer Holland, and if Spain conquers Holland, the revolt's over and Holland's gone, and these are all new rules to handle this that are kind of exciting to me. That's my UPS guy not delivering anything to me, but I have to keep my ear open because otherwise I won't hear him. Okay. If there's a peace treaty, Spain automatically recognizes Dutch independence. Now, there's also the possibility of truces within this. I think they last for 2 turns or something. I gotta look them up. But the war ends, nobody gets any penalties, sort of, but it restarts in a couple turns. And that's not a recognition effect. Now, at the beginning, each side is just going to lose 1 stability per turn from this event. But once we enter the next phase, which is like 1615, it's down here, quite a few turns later, then only Spain starts taking a stability loss of 2 per turn. And then once it hits period 5, it'll be Spain all the way up at 3 per turn, as long as the revolt is active. Okay. All kinds of special rules, like I said, to this sucker. If they're involved in other wars, for whatever reason, then they lose normal stability based on those wars instead, unless their Dutch is longer. Now here's the biggie. Once Spain triggers this event, they get 5 victory points per turn. This didn't used to happen, so what happened was Spain would say, I don't want this thing. I know I'm going to lose. There's actually no chance that they can win this thing. I know you can conquer all of the Netherlands, but the reality is if the Dutch don't want you to win it, they can prevent you. They can push you out of any of their kind of swampy provinces anytime they like and prevent you from taking it. It costs them 5 victory points to do that per province, though. So it may end up that the war is so costly to the Dutch that they're willing to take a bailout of the game at this point as the Dutch. They get to play as the Habsburgs then, which may not be terribly good Spain loses something by having a player as the Habsburgs, although they're still tied to each other by a defensive treaty. Spain will be allowed to raid the Portuguese during this war once Portugal gets taken over by Spain. They say Spain is allowed to raid them. The Dutch are allowed to raid them. Okay, and then there's rules on conquering Holland. And I'm not going to worry too much about them, but basically, yeah, Spain gets to all Holland's counters. They get to build Dutch armies up here. They get to use Dutch colonies wherever they like. They get to use Dutch manufacturers, all within Holland itself. And they become really this very, very powerful country because of it, which would be a frightening thing to see. That's only going to happen if the Dutch are really screwed here. And like I said, they'll end up becoming Austria. And when that happens, Austria stops being in a special situation with Spain in the same way, but they are in a enforced defensive treaty where they must join if Spain calls them. Doesn't cost anything. That's similar, but not quite as powerful as the situation Spain has right now. And as a minor, they can't be forced into a peace in the same way. The Dutch could, of course, say, I'm making a separate peace. So it would weaken some of the Spanish power. But overall, it looks like a big Spanish gain if they can win this thing. There's an alternative to this, which is the Kingdom of the Netherlands. This is, at first I thought, oh, this must be some kind of bonus for the Dutch. It's not. It's if the Dutch have to rely on someone else to save their bacon, then they're allowed to essentially make a deal saying, I'm going to turn myself into a monarchy, and I either crown a royal house, a member of a royal house from another power, and that can be anything except Counter-Reformation. And there's certain restrictions on them at that point. Dynastic crisis happens. It hurts Holland overall. It creates a defensive alliance with that other country. But it's not terrible to Holland. The second option is to crown a dual ruler, which really looks painful, right? Introducing a monarchy. New Holland. Dual monarchy is until a dynastic crisis occurs in the partner country. Holland would be allowed to denounce that, which causes a dynastic crisis with a new Holland monarch chosen. And basically, either of these options are defeats for Holland. The Dutch really want to remain a republic here. But if they can't maintain themselves in the face of Spanish power, if they need someone to intervene, they do have ways that they can get some, either a Protestant or a conciliatory power to help them out and have some kind of bribe to give, essentially. All right, well, that took a lot of time. I think I'll load this up, even though we didn't get a lot spoken here. We did, or a lot done with all those words. I think it is kind of key to understand what's dominating this period. This event is the focus, at least, of the West. It's not too important to Turkey or Russia. Okay, up it goes.